So what are we doing in today's video, Murray?
Today, we're going to be looking at Malediction. It's a brand new game from Loot Studios, renowned creator of STLs and all of your favorite Dungeons & Dragons sort of themed miniatures, and they've got their own game.
We have chosen two armies that we're gonna paint up today. So we're gonna find out if card building and miniature wargaming can be combined together to make an awesome and unique game. It's tabletop time.
This video is sponsored by Malediction. So looking through my faction box, the Legion of the Fallen, I want to focus on big monsters and scary things. So I've picked up this big, like, grotesque abomination, as well as a death assassin. And then we have this ghoul. It's like a three-headed ghost with two massive sickles. So I'm going to paint that one as well. So I'll be right back with models. So as I said before, this is the thrice murdered individual with the three heads. It's got the vibe of a ghost, and that seems to be very much reflected in its rules. It's got this phasing ability where if it gets grazed in combat, it can just sort of ignore the damage. So it goes around and does a lot of disruption, drains some health back when it hurts someone, and otherwise can drift around obstacles. It seems to have pretty good characteristics as far as I can work out. Some nice attack power, quite a bit of health, and seems like it will stick around and hopefully annoy the hell out of Jen, so I love that. Next we have an actual named character, Cestinar the Silent, the murder assassin. Now his shtick is that he is immune to spells, which might be extremely helpful. And of course the classical assassin stuff, gets bonuses on ambushing and has some hit and run abilities. Overall, he seems to hit pretty damn hard and will probably fold like a paper plane up against something like Jen's Griffins. But then up finally we have the Flesh Ripper, my big, grotesque fruit punch bowl of unwilling victims. He is exactly what you might expect him to be, a big, tough thing that hits hard and can take a hit in return. It'll absorb some health when it hits something, and it will get very upset and flail out when it dies. Other than that, it's a bit inaccurate in landing its punches, but it has a hell of a lot of health, so I can't wait to try that big boy out. Now, when it comes to choosing colors for undead, I don't want to go with anything really healthy, if that makes sense. I don't want to go with vibrant and warm reds or oranges. You know, people of great vitality, rosy-cheeked maidens. There's none of that here. We're all miserable, dead, and clawing for power. So when it comes to painting skin for the undead, I'm gonna stick to purples, dark blues, off greeny yellows, those sorts of things. I'm gonna use those in all the skin tones, and that'll add this really sort of sickly, vampiric skin tone. And then by following all these rules that I'm setting for myself, I'm going to end up with a really cool and moody effect for all of these miniatures. And with my models done, it's time to check in on Jen.
So I've decided to paint these guys a little bit different to how they are represented on the box. And I have to say, the artwork is absolutely gorgeous, but I want to change things up a little bit and make it my own. I decided to go with a gold non-metallic metal for all of the armor in this army and incorporate some blue as well for all of their cloth. I think on the battlefield this will look really striking, especially against Murray's sort of darker color scheme. I think this is a really good choice in a paint scheme, and it'll be really interesting to see how I can incorporate the sort of overall theme to different miniatures. And speaking of different miniatures, there is a few to choose from in this faction. While I do have a couple of humans, both male and female, there's also a couple of creatures too, which is very exciting to paint up. So currently all of the miniatures for Malediction are at 42mm scale, which for someone like me is super awesome because I love painting bigger miniatures. This is because I find that I can put more detail or more effort, more of my painting skill into these bigger pieces. I can interpret them a little bit better than I would be able to when they're smaller. And overall, I just like being able to handle them a little bit better as well when they're bigger. So with my paint scheme chosen, I'm gonna paint a couple of these guys up and talk about how they're gonna function in the game. So one of my favorite models aside from my Seeker is this guy on the Griffin, and his name is Rogarth, and he is very cool indeed. So Rogarth has a couple of special abilities. He gets an extra free move as well as an extra attack. So I think he's going to be a pretty powerful character on the battlefield and really pack a punch. Next up, we have the Herald of Salvation. This model is absolutely stunning. She's a beautiful angel character and gets some cool abilities as well. In terms of stats, she's pretty much on par with my Seeker. However, being an angel does give her some extra abilities. The first giving her flying, which allows her to move over any obstacle. She can also help some of the other units recover their health and also absorbs damage too. So there's a couple of really special abilities on here that I think will be super useful in my game. And the other other model I want to talk about is the Warfront Commander, and he's all about hyping up everyone and making sure that they stay safe, giving other units a extra attack or move action, as well as adding a buff to their damage. I believe I get 2 of these guys in the starter deck, so having 2 of them moving around the field, again buffing everyone up, I think is going to be a huge advantage. So having a look at all the cards, the characters, and seeing how it's going to be played, I can kind of get an idea of how this army is going to work, but it's all going to play out on the battlefield. So let's take a closer look at all of our finished models. And while we do, a quick thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. Dave is about to start work on some terrain pieces, and then we can finally begin our first game of Malediction.
So something really unique about Malediction that you don't often get with box games is terrain. So there's all the card terrain in the set, but there's also STLs. And I decided, why not? I'm gonna chuck them on these bamboo printers. I literally just clicked auto support and threw them on the prints, which made me realize I'm kind of out of it with FDM printing. I haven't done much of it in a while. And the technology is coming along so well that I'm excited to see the outcome. So as well as general terrain, each faction has faction terrain. And this is the faction terrain for the Order of the Shattered Throne. It's this big gateway here. Aside from these tree supports, I reckon it printed pretty well. So I'm gonna grab this. I'm also gonna grab Murray's terrain. I'm gonna take it down to tabletop time and give it a bit of a paint job.
So if you're anything like me, you probably put off painting terrain. It's one of those things I always want to do and plan to do, and then when the time comes, I end up painting the next miniature for my next project. Another thing is terrain can be really expensive, which is why I was so impressed today. I've kind of slept on FDM printing for a couple of years. So I was super impressed when I chucked these models on and just clicked auto support, and they came out gorgeously. The supports peeled off, something that 2 or 3 years ago felt like a nightmare to remove, and overall the quality of them was outstanding for an FDM print. So the 2 bits of terrain I printed were the large terrain. Now there's actually small, medium, and large, a few varieties of the small and medium for each faction in Malediction, and you get them alongside your miniatures. I decided to paint up and print the largest of the 2, and that's the Order of the Shattered Throne. They have this gateway, and then there's this huge miry tree with a bunch of gribbly looking legs that's a little bit Giga-esque, and that's Murray's. So I tackled that piece of terrain first. Now, to avoid getting completely overwhelmed with a project like this, I decided to dive into the airbrush. One of the amazing things about terrain is you really are looking at that 3 feet distance rule, so you can do a lot of work with really quick painting techniques. I decided to go for a bunch of colors that were all just a little bit off. The strange chitinous elements of the tree, I was inspired again by Giga, and I went for an alien-esque blacky blue color. For the tree, I decided I wanted it to be a little bit more of a flesh tone brown, so I mixed a bunch of reds in, and it's just got a little bit of an unsettling quality, like tentacles. And for all of those weird legs that are protruding from the base of the tree, I made sure to paint them in a sort of dead flesh. It's got a little bit of like red in it, but mostly it's gray purple. It's a really gross color. You'd probably advise someone who had skin this color to see a doctor, so it's perfect for some terrain for the Legion of the Fallen. To finish up this terrain, I threw down a bunch of dry brushes, accenting all of the colors and pushing them further in the stylistic directions I'd already chosen. Blues with a tiny green tint for that Giga alien flesh, nice rosy flesh for the wood, and a really pallid flesh tone for those limbs. As a final finishing touch, when all of that is dried, I decided to throw in some blood where these legs are tearing out of the trunk of the tree. It's really unsettling. Now, the Order of the Shattered Throne terrain was a million times simpler. I mean, it's all stonework. So basically what I did is airbrushed in some sepia to create some variance in all of the surfaces and get a sense of weathering. And then for all of those smoky areas where the energy effects are pulling the rock apart, I used Hex Wraith Flame in the airbrush just to separate it out, and I think it makes for a fantastic smoke effect. effect. Now the really cool thing here is I could dry brush the entire model in white, and this dry brushing could go over the hex wraith and over the stone. And altogether, I'm really impressed with how this pops out and looks like this pristine, noble terrain being pulled apart by a magical cataclysm. Super simple to do and get amazing effects, and you'll be able to replicate them at home really easily. With those done, I'm excited to take these over to the team because they're ready to play their game and teach you all how to play Malediction as well.
We're here and we're ready. We've got the miniatures, the boards. Dave has finished painting the printed terrain. This is the biggest pieces, and we're gonna play a game.
Yeah, it's finally time to do our first game of Malediction and give you guys a step-by-step guide on how the game actually works.
Yeah, this is the first time we've played on the channel, actually.
Oh yes,
This will be good.
yes. Let's do it. Okay, so let's get started with our first game of Malediction. Battlefield. First up, players need to set up their battlefield. We're playing on a 61 by 61 centimeter board. We then place our Seeker, Legacy, and Terrain cards face up in front of us and grab everything else we need, like rulers, dice, and damage tokens. Terrain. Next up, we've got to place our terrain. We have these 2 pieces of large terrain that Dave has kindly printed and painted for us. Thanks, Dave. We're also going to add 2 smaller pieces of terrain from the punch boards that come with the game. There are 2 sides to these terrain pieces. One side indicates where models can and cannot pass through by being shaded in different colors. This is a handy guide, but once you become familiar, you can turn these over and use the pure art sides. Next up is our main objective for the game, husks. In our game, we have 4 husks to place on the table, which contain relics, which we'll talk about next. Relics are impressive objects that you can attach to your characters to give them a massive advantage. This is a separate deck of cards with the top 4 placed upright. A relic is worth 10 mastery each when you pick them up, but you can also lose relics, which decreases your mastery by 10. Resources. There are 2 types of resources to gain in Malediction, Echo and Mastery. Echo is your spending resource. Deploying characters using certain abilities or spells can cost Echo. Echo is gained every game round, with each player gaining Echo equal to double the number of the current game round. The second resource is Mastery. Collecting relics to gain Mastery is the key to winning the game, and with 40 Mastery and you will become the winner. You can also gain Mastery by defeating enemies. To win the game, claiming relics and defeating your enemies will be the key. Starting hand. Finally, to start our game, we both draw a hand of 7 cards. These decks are our personal army arsenal. It contains characters, spells, and items that can be deployed onto the battlefield. You can customize and personalize these decks, creating the perfect one to match your playstyle. Bidding. Now, Malediction has an interesting mechanic when it comes to gaining initiative, the bidding system. Once the round has commenced, players choose to gain the initiative by bidding. This is done by selecting one of the cards in your hand. The number indicated at the top of the card is its value. Players choose their card, placing them face down and then revealing it. The person with the higher card gains initiative. The cards, however, are banished, so make sure you choose wisely. Playing the game. Malediction has 4 phases within each round, a game lasting around 5 rounds. The first phase is the refresh phase, which is important from round 2 onwards, and we will cover that a bit later. The second phase is the deploy phase. Since I had the initiative this round, I picked all the characters I wanted to deploy onto the battlefield from my hand. I placed these cards face up and deployed them within 6 inches of my deployment area and paid for them using my Echo. We then alternated with Murray deploying his army as well. Next up is the action phase. Malediction has alternating activations, meaning there is a strategy in which units you should choose to activate first. Every character has 2 AP to spend, which they have a number of choices. Moving, attacking, using unique character abilities are just some of the things AP can be spent on during this phase. Once the unit has been activated and its AP spent, its card is then exhausted. You turn it to one side, indicating that it cannot be activated again for this round. Faction decks also come with spells which fall into 2 categories. Channel and Swift. Channel spells can be spent on an action turn without using AP. I kind of forgot this rule when we were playing, but Murray used this to his full advantage. The other type of spell, Swift spells, can be used anytime during the action phase, but these are often a reflexive move for protection, such as diverting an attack or healing. However, these do cost Echo to use. The last phase is the end phase. Murray and myself were both in range of 2 husk tokens, which means we both get to claim 2 relics and 20 mastery each. We took turns picking our relics, and then we got to begin round 2 of the game. Now, this is where the refresh phase, or phase 1, becomes critical. All of your units become refreshed, players draw 2 cards, and accrue more echo to spend. This phase is very similar to untap, upkeep, draw from Magic the Gathering. Another interesting feature of the game here is that you can deploy units mid-game, paying their cost in the reinforcement step and deploying them onto your deployment zone, or nearby an allied unit that is not currently engaged in combat. This means battles can evolve and change as they go, keeping things dynamic and exciting. One of the most important things about Malediction is understanding how your army works and what combos you can achieve. While there's also an element of luck on what cards you draw that will help you win the game. For example, most of the units in my army provided buffs for each other if they were in close proximity to each other, meaning grouping up was a good option for me, and I was lucky to have drawn lots of different characters to deploy. I also had a lot of help from Dave as my coach and personal cheerleader, so thank you, Dave. After 5 rounds, we had finally finished our game of Malediction. I think if the footage wasn't obvious, I had won the game against Murray. So we shook hands like good sportsmen, and now it's time to share our final thoughts of Malediction. So if you would like to get your hands on Loot Studio's newest game, Malediction, you can find them over on GameFound. This is just a taster for what's on offer from these guys, and we really enjoyed this game, so we know you will too. It's a super unique game, giving everything you need to play, including standees, as well as STLs for terrain and the models. This means it's extremely competitively priced, coming in well below where other boxed games are priced. So please go support Malediction over on GameFound. All of the links will be down in the description below.
We're finished. We've had our game. I don't know about you, Jen, but I really like that reinforcement mechanic. The fact that you can deploy back into your deployment zone is really cool, but deploying near an unengaged friendly unit is really cool. Yeah.
I also liked that all of the cards had specific symbols for each thing.
All the iconography, yeah.
Yeah, so something I struggle with a lot is just like reading. So being able to see a symbol and go, oh, I add this, can add this, can add this, and then figure out what their like total defense is super, super helpful. So
yeah,
really
for sure.
that.
I really think this game would appeal to anyone who really enjoys the deck building aspects of things, coming up with really good strategies and then seeing them unfold on a battlefield that is a really quick turnaround. It's a small area. This took us an hour a bit.
Yeah.
And this was our first game.
Yeah, exactly.
Very quick.
I think if you're someone that maybe wants to get into wargaming, but maybe like an army is a bit too much, and maybe the game is a bit too much, this is definitely a more simplified version of it, but with more unique characters and a more unique play style as well. So if you're someone that kind of enjoys more skirmish style games, I think this is a really good fit. And again, yeah, if you're a TCG lover and you like enjoy playing any sort of card game where you get to customize your deck, it's a good fit.
Plus, as you can see, we had a mishmash of miniatures and the tokens that come in the set. So you can sort of play around with whatever appeals to you as a hobbyist or just a board gamer.
Hey, Dave.
I think from watching the game and playing the game, if you like games like Warhammer Underworlds, but you kind of get annoyed by the really limiting turn, like Warhammer Underworlds, you have 3 turns and you can maybe activate like 12 times in the whole game, so you don't really get to like play it out. This gives you that like really satisfying combo of card game and miniature gaming, but then you get to like play it out. But that's our video, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully you learned how to play. I got to paint some cool terrain. You guys painted some sweet minis and play a game. I was banned from playing, but I'm very glad that my wife held up our family honor and continued the streak of winning.
Thanks, Coach.
On the channel.
It's just the winning team now, is it?
Yeah!
Thanks for watching, everyone. Check out Malediction. All the links are in the description. And if you want to check the Patreon, also in the description.
Bye.
Now say it like a vampire.
This game is sponsored.
It's like...
That was like a goblin.
I want to suck your blood.
No more capes.
Transylvanian.
This video is sponsored by Loot Studio's game Malediction.
That was great.